Welcome to the Savvy Working Mom podcast. This is the place where we share strategies to help you create a life you love. I'm your host, Whitney, a real-life working mom in the tech industry, professional speaker, and coach. I'm going to help you figure out how to work and mom in a way that brings you joy by using simple systems and through interviews with other working moms who are making it work. Remember that with intentional and daily action, you can live your best days now and forever. Pam Nemic is a seasoned professional with a remarkable journey as a career mom. With 2 children of her own, Pam navigated the challenges of single motherhood while building her career. Her dedication and resilience led her to become a senior leader at Whataburger, where she honed her leadership skills and made a lasting impact. Now, as her children have grown, Pam shares her invaluable insights and experiences with other working moms on our podcast today. She offers practical advice on navigating the complexities of career advancement while raising a family. And remember, y'all, she got to that senior position mostly spending her time as a single mom. From time management strategies to fostering a supportive work environment, Pam's wisdom and expertise empower us to thrive in our professional and personal lives. Pam, it's so great to have you on the show.
It's so good to be here, Whitney. And thanks for having me. And I can't wait to talk about all the things about being a career-driven and a good mama altogether.
Yeah, those are things that I think my listeners and myself, I aim to be. And I know that it's not always easy. So let's first talk a little bit about your career. Can you tell me where you've worked, what you've done as far as career goes?
Yeah. So when I graduated from college, I kind of started off in a position that I didn't really necessarily want to be in. I started off in radio sales down in a small town in Corpus Christi, Texas. And I lived in a little town outside of that. And I started in radio sales for a country music station and quickly realized that was not my thing. I ended up getting recruited into a public relations role for a children's home, which I really liked that role. And then from there, I stayed in nonprofit for a few years, working in kind of a fundraising / public relations mode. And then I had my first child at 27 years old. And at that point, I was working in Houston for the Muscular Dystrophy Association, raising funds for their amazing cause. And I enjoyed that. But when I got pregnant with my baby, I realized that the hours were probably not going to work for me. So I ended up transitioning to a teacher. So I was a teacher in marketing and business classes for a few years, and that worked great. But then, as life has it, I started deciding, I was like, you know what, I really want to stay home with my children. So for 5 years, I was a stay-at-home mom with a side hustle, and I did some special event planning and so on. And then it took me a while to really find my long-term career. And as a mom, after staying home for 5 years, I decided to go back to work full-time for a few reasons that were going on in my personal life. So I decided to go back to work full-time, and through my side hustle was recruited to work for Whataburger. And I started there as a marketing manager. And 20 years later, I left as their senior vice president of HR, brand communications, and company culture. So that is what my journey was. But for the majority of my career, I really was focused on building culture through leadership and communication. And I just loved it. And I loved working for that brand. It was a brand that was known for its culture and a brand that was just really good to me for many years. And so it was a great run.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what I'm hearing are a lot of different themes, like nonlinear career, right? You started out in radio sales, and then, which is like completely different than being the SVP of culture and people and like being responsible for leadership in that way. And all along, right between, you were able to use skills in different ways. And even when you decided to become a stay-at-home mom, you were still growing your skills, right, through the side hustle that you had. And then I'm also hearing this idea of like my career taking off, deciding to go full time. And rather than thinking about work like a job, thinking about it like a career, right? Like something you're going to do over time where you're going to build skills and responsibilities. And I think those are super interesting themes to think about that as women, we have to be very conscious about, especially once we decide to have kids. Right? Because what I also heard is a very conscious decision to say, hey, I am going to step out of the workforce right now while I think you have 2 kids, right?
I do. I have 2 children, a boy who is now 24 and my daughter is 28.
Awesome. So you said, I'm going to step out of the workforce for a little bit while my kids are young and then make that decision to later go back.
Yeah, it was a scary time to like make that kind of call because as a woman, if you step out of the workforce, you might not be seen as a valuable resource when you get back in it. And so I made a choice at that point to say, well, my kids really need me right now, and I want to be close to them when they're little. So that's what I did. But here's what I did in addition to that. I knew that at some point I was going to get back into the workforce. And so I started that side hustle. And when I say that, it was an event planning company that I used to keep my toe in the water as I was also raising my children. And so I would work with companies and I would plan events to market their new product or market their business or market their service. And by doing that, I ended up meeting a friend. Now her name is Diane. And Diane met me we were planning a Texas music festival together. And she was in charge of that downtown district. And so she and I became friends. And she worked for Whataburger at the time. So she ended up being the person that said, hey, there's this position open. And I know you've been talking about getting back into kind of more of a full-time role, not necessarily an entrepreneurial role. Would you be interested? And I was like, yeah, I think I would. Because some things were going on in my marriage that were concerning me. And I thought, well, maybe if I get this job, the financial side of things will settle and he'll feel better and things will all work out. So I just decided for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and take this job. And I'm so sorry. I remember on my first day of going into working at Whataburger, I was excited, but I was also like just sick at my stomach. And I think it was because I was worried that my kids, who had been used to me being around, didn't have me now, right? I was going to have to go back to work. And so it really bothered me at first, but I had to kind of figure out ways to make sure that they were good, I was good, work was good. And over time, I got into a rhythm that helped me a lot. But at first, it really was kind of hard.
I love all of that. And I want to unpack some of it because I think you shared some things that'll be really valuable to everyone who's listening. The first is I heard you say I was very strategic about how I spent my time when I stopped working, right? You're like, okay, I'm going to stop working, but I'm also going to do this other thing that's going to allow me to have a bit of a connection, which will give me some options for later on if I want to go back to work or if I need to kind of continue to build a network.
Absolutely. And I think that is so important. I even tell this to my daughter, who's now 28 years old, and she's a stay-at-home mom right now, but she was working in a career before that. And I tell her it's totally great to stay home with your kids. And I absolutely wouldn't trade those years for anything. However, you've got to keep your skill set up. Just in case, not to be negative, but there's things that happen in life, whether it's a divorce, whether it's a death, whether it's something. And so as a woman, you really have to be able to take care of yourself. And so I tell my daughter that. I was like, hey, make sure you keep your skill set up so that if you ever need to or want to re-enter that workforce, you have something to point to. And currently she's an amazing photographer. So she does that as her side hustle. And I know that if there was ever a time she really needed to go all in, she could go all in on that business. Right now, she does enough to keep her skill set up. But if she ever wanted to really go 100%, she could. And I just think for me, it's because I was blindsided as a woman. And I thought I come from a long line of marriage in my family. My mom and dad married for 53 years. My grandparents were married till the day they died. I was almost naive thinking that mine would be the same. I would have the same experience. And then when I didn't, I was so grateful to have the ability to not just take care of myself, but to take care of my children in a way that was extremely comfortable and fun. And we got to travel and we got to do all the things that you want to give your children from an experience standpoint. And not to mention, I was able to give them my time. And those things were very important to me. I really advocate for women to say, I absolutely believe that spending time with your children is so important, but don't do it at the expense of your security long term.
What I heard is that in having your side hustle, it wasn't about making money, right? Your priority wasn't to make money. Your priority was to keep your skill set up and to have something you can point to should you need an option later.
Absolutely. And it was never about the money. It was about two things, honestly. It was in order for me to be able to re-enter the workforce, I needed something to point to. So that was number one. Number two, I just think that it was good for me to have something outside that I did that was not just being my mom. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I think I was a pretty good one, but I just knew that I would have to have something to point to. And it's funny because now I'm going to date myself because I'm old, but I remember distinctly when I went in for that interview with Whataburger that first time. I mean, here I was, really a stay-at-home mom with a side hustle. I made that time look good. I had my little portfolio back then. That you didn't have websites or anything like that. I had a little portfolio and I put all the images and the results of those events that I did. And so I made that time look bigger than it actually was, right? I mean, I admit that now because, hey, 20 years later, I did okay, but I made it bigger than it was. And I made it look really good. Like I had all this experience doing marketing. At the time, I didn't have that much experience. I had a college degree in mass communication, and I had some experience, obviously, prior to me staying home. And I had some experience running those events. But in the big scheme of things, I am pretty sure they could have found somebody way more qualified than I was when they hired me. But because I had strategically thought about how am I going to do this when I re-enter the workforce, I had something to show. And that made all the difference, along with the reference from my friend Diane.
Yes. So you had something to show and you were able to go back into the workforce, which gave you that kind of internal thing that maybe you needed. And it also provided you what you had mentioned before, some financial independence and options in life, right? In case life happens, right? As it tends to. And I know when we say life happens, if you make air quotes about it, life happened to you. You alluded to that a little bit. So can you share a bit more there?
Yeah, I had been asked by the company to relocate to San Antonio. We were moving our headquarters. And I had also been given a promotion that was a significant pay raise, obviously to entice me to do so. And I wanted to go. I wanted to leave the town that I had been in for a while. I was ready to see a bigger city and just experience new things. And so I went home and told my husband at the time that I had been promoted, I had a significant pay raise, and they would like me to relocate. And he reluctantly agreed. He was not keen on moving, but he knew that it was a big deal as far as financial. So we went with it. And so we moved. And that was in 2009. So we relocated the kids. And my daughter at the time was 14 and my son was 10. And shortly after we relocated, we had just moved into the house we built. And I found out that I was going to become a single mom. And so I ended up divorcing my husband shortly after that move. And it couldn't have been worse timing, to be quite honest. Well, I say that, I guess it could have been worse. I could have declined the job and been stuck where I was. It felt like it couldn't have been worse timing because I was uprooting. I had already uprooted my children from what they had known. I had uprooted myself from what I had known. My support system wasn't there anymore. And then I find this. And so it was just a really stressful time. And I was in charge, by the way, of communicating and helping all the other people relocate their families and get settled into the new home office we had. And so I was busy communicating all of those things while I was dealing personally with my family kind of being just shaken up. And it was a really trying time. But the good news of it was my now ex-husband and I were able to really navigate that in a way that was positive for the kids. We remained friends to this day and we have a respectful relationship. And so it was okay. In the end, we were able to navigate it in the best interest of our kids. And my kids to this day still thank me for that because it was one of those moments where you don't necessarily want to be nice to each other. And I'm sure I wasn't at many points, but over time, we just became to where it was like, you know what, we got to just do what's best for these kids at this point. And so that's what we did. And through that time, I was also able to navigate a career now because at this point, I'm like, okay, it's on me now. And I have got to figure out how to raise a career while raising good kids. And I never wanted my kids to think that my career was more important than they were because it was just me and them. So I had to be focused on them as well.
Yeah, that is so heavy. So you were going through some of life's major stressors all at once. It was a move to a new city. You had a preteen and a tween, or whatever they're calling them now, but a 10 and a 14-year-old. You were going through your own divorce. You had a new role. That new role also, it sounds like being a people and culture leader, right? That new role also had you having to deal with other people, thinking about other people's emotions, and that empathy takes energy, right, from you. You're kind of going through all of that. One of the things that you mentioned earlier is that you had to do the things things that meant like work was good, you were good, and your kids were good. And I love that you also called yourself out in this, because I think a lot of times as women, at least I know this happens to me, sometimes I'm just so worried about work being good and the kids being good that I forget, oh, I need to be good too and take care of myself. So I so appreciate you saying like, I focus on me being good, work being good, and the kids being good. Can you talk a little bit about how you did that, how you prioritized your time, how you communicated with your kids about work, how you communicated with work about your kids and your family needs and your personal needs, so that you could grow this career to reach such a high level and impactful role as SVP?
That's a great question, Whitney, because I think that's one of the areas women who are going through a tough time in their life have to really be cognizant of and thoughtful in the way they go about dealing with this, because there were days I did it really well and then there were days I didn't. Sometimes you just don't, you feel off when you just can't get yourself there. But one of the things that I did, and this is what I attribute to company culture, which is what I coach and teach and speak on today, is why company culture is so critical to the employees, because I experienced it firsthand. And so I worked for the CEO at the time all of this happened. And I had an amazing CEO at the time. His name was Preston, and he was just very supportive. And so I went to him and I just was honest. And I said, hey, this is what's going on in my life. I'm going to have a little bit of a focus issue right now because I've got to make sure my kids are okay. And he was just amazing. And so I think that's the other part of this. Having a supervisor, leader, boss, whatever you want to call them, really supportive of what you're going through at that point is key. Now, here's the other part, though. I didn't take advantage of it. I really tried to understand that, look, they have a company to run. I have a family to run. They have a company to run. And so I don't want to be a burden on them with my personal issues going on. So I tried to keep that to a minimum. Thankfully, he was so great. He made it easy for me to navigate. So a couple of things that I did during that time to get through it was I set some kind of what I would call non-negotiables. And some of the non-negotiables that I had was I wanted to make sure that I was in the stands, in the audience for my children, right? I didn't want to miss their track meets. I didn't want to miss their basketball games. I didn't want to miss their performances. Whatever they were doing, I wanted them to be able to look in the stands and there would be mom. There was like a time I wasn't able to do that because I was running a national convention and it was my team in charge. I couldn't be there. So I FaceTimed in, but my entire family showed up for them. And I think that's another part of this is having a support system around you. So when I was having to be out of town or I couldn't be at an event or a game or something, well, I had an amazing family and there they were in the stands. So I think that's something else for women to think about is create a support system around you who can be there for your children and build those relationships with them in addition to you building relationships with them. So non-negotiables for me were be in the stands, be at the games, do your absolute best to do that because I think it's so important to your kids. So I would leave meetings. I would skip some dinners. I would say, I know you guys are all going to dinner and happy hour and doing all these things and it'd be a great networking thing for me to do, but I'm going to go network with my kids because they need me more. And that's just what I started doing. I would leave and I might not show up for those dinners. And it was okay. It all worked out. And then I had my support system to help me when I needed them and when my kids needed them.
Can we talk a little bit about that idea of a support system? Because I think it's in today's world, it's one of the things that a lot of us deal with, right? So I live in a place, I know I deal with it, right? Because I live in a place now and I've lived in several places at this point where I don't have family nearby, right? I don't have those traditional supports in place. My friends from high school, my girlfriends, we all live in different cities. My family lives in different cities, non-drivable cities. We're talking, my mom is like 15-hour drive away. So in a pinch, she could really do it. And actually once she had to and did, but it's not like, oh, someone can hop in the car and be there in a couple hours should something happen. And so I found as well that to make it work, having that support system and being that support system for others, it's a game changer. Can you talk about or share some tips on how we can build those support systems?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I was blessed to have family close by and not in the same town necessarily, but close enough. And so I understand it would be a little more difficult if you don't have that. I would have to say what I would have done had I not had that. I would have created very deep friendships with other women and moms who understand other working moms who understand what we're dealing with so that we could support one another. I think that looking for the organizations that have women in business, women who are working, women who understand, and really forging those kind of friendships and relationships, and then helping them. I would have been extending a hand to help them. I would have been saying, hey, let your kids come over. I watch your kids, and then they can watch you. And then let those kids learn their family. Let those kids learn that mom and dad. Because I think that when kids can feel comfortable that, hey, mom has these friendships and these relationships, and I like them, and they're fun, and they're like family now. And if you can build that kind of network on a local, I guess, level where you have that around you in addition to your family that might be far away, that's kind of the only way to do it at this point. Because, and I'm Whitney, I'm sure you have tips on that too, because you've been in it. But if that would have been me and I had not had the network I had with my family, I absolutely would have been reaching out, getting involved in groups, finding out where the mom groups were, finding out where the working moms were, and trying to build those kind of friendships and relationships so we could support one another. Because I just think women are amazing. First of all, I think we can juggle so many things. And I think that when we get past the guardedness that some women might have with other women, when we can let that guard down and we can really be real with each other and say, this is what I dealt with, and I'm flawed and I don't know what I'm doing either. And man, I'd help you if you can help me. I just think that's where the real friendships start to form. And I think we can be each other's biggest advocates and biggest support system if we're just willing to really let our guard down and get to know one another and say, hey, let's help each other.
Yeah, it's so true. As women, we want to help each other. I think women want to help other women. And I think especially working moms want to help other working moms because we all know what the struggle is. And the gap is really in spending enough time with someone else to trust them enough with your children.
Absolutely. I had a weird kind of thing I felt happening right after when I got divorced, and I was now a single mother in a smaller type town and a new town. People did not know me. I had lived in an area before that everybody knew my family, knew our name, knew me. It was just like I didn't have to explain my character. What was interesting when you move to a new town, you almost have to reestablish your reputation and say, oh, no, this is the kind of person I am. This is how I raise my children. And this is what I'm really about when it comes to my character and my values. And so I found that to be an interesting challenge. Nobody knew me. And so making friends in a new town was harder than anything I'd ever experienced before. I had tons of friends at work because they knew me, but I needed friends in town, in the town where I lived. And that was challenging. I don't know if you've dealt with that, but it was a weird deal, especially being single. They were like, no, girl, you go over there. You're not married with children. It was like this weird dynamic going on.
100%. Making friends as an adult, I think, is one of the hardest things to do. And having moved and I've lived in a lot of different cities as an adult, I can tell you that those days of like when you're young and in college and everyone's doors open, they go away. And I don't think they go away just because people don't want to make friends. But one, yeah, most people already have their established social circles. And most people only have so much time to spend in social circles. And so meeting new people just isn't really a priority for a lot of folks. And then if you show up to a town and it's just, you're like, hey, I'm new, let's meet, let's do things. Most people are like, well, yeah, cool, let's do something. And they might have the best intent. But then work happens and their other friends happen and their family happens. And then they don't have the time to invest to start to learn and grow and trust you. And I think also as we get older, you find people and you're like, I vibe with you, I don't vibe with you. And I think it's a little faster that we make that decision, right? We don't spend as much time trying to say, okay, maybe I kind of vibe with you. It's like either I do or I don't. And if I don't, then like I'm going to move on.
That's it.
Making friends as an adult is really difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what I found in that space is when I became a mom, most of my girlfriends, in fact, all my girlfriends, I was the first of my friends to have kids. And I mean, I had my kids older, but a lot of my friends are like single or career oriented or for whatever we have literally chosen not to have kids, right? Because there's women out there who choose this. But so I was the only one. And that being a new mom thing was such a life-changing thing that when I met other women who are going through that same life-changing thing at the same time, it opened that door a little bit more for us to start to explore each other and bond over that new experience that we had.
Yeah.
And then I've also found being a working mom in general, that is something we can bond over because it is in some ways a very singular experience. And if you meet someone else who's going through it, that's something you can bond over and kind of take deeper. But you have to find those very meaningful experiences to have that someone else might be going through as well. I think that's the fastest way as an adult to meet the right people who will become your adult friends.
Yeah. And I think that's why finding the networks of people that are already like you in a way, I mean, they're the working mom, or they're the entrepreneur, or they're the mom that's really involved in sports, or loves to be at the school event, whatever those things are. You got to find your niche and then go there first. And then you'll find there's going to be people you vibe with, people you don't, people that you say, I'm just not clicking with that person. But then there'll be those ones that you do. And you go, oh my gosh. I met a girl just the other day. She invited me to lunch and it was like I had known her my whole life. Just easiest person in the world to talk to, connect to. And she was a career mom. She worked at a university locally. And she just had called me to say, hey, I just want to meet with you. I heard your friend Molly told me I should meet you. So I went to lunch with her. She was amazing. She was a mom of 8 kids the same age as me. She was a career woman and just so down to earth, lived in this town, the town that I'm in now. I just loved her. And there's people like that you meet that you just go, man, that was so easy. And so we're going to all get together with my other friend, Molly, and we're all going to get together again. Sometimes it's just like being willing to say yes to a lunch with somebody you don't know, and then being so pleasantly surprised. And it happens a lot. And so one of the things that I've had to do recently is once I left my 20-year corporate career and I started my own entrepreneurial journey as a speaker and a consultant for companies trying to build better company cultures and stronger communication within that culture, I started to say, look, Pam, you can't be behind the brand anymore. I was always just because I was working for a big brand, people came around and wanted to talk to me and wanted to talk to us. But now, I didn't have anything to offer really, except, my past experience. And so I had to learn to start saying yes to things that made me a little uncomfortable, right? I am not a big networker. I don't love going in a room with a bunch of people I don't know. I don't like small talk. If I'm going to talk, I want to talk about something that's meaningful, that I want to help people. I want to help somebody maybe fix something. I don't know. It just has to be a deeper connection to me. And so I really struggle with the whole, I'm going to just go to this networking event. I'm like, oh gosh. But what I've learned is if I say yes to those things that make me feel kind of out of my element or uncomfortable, it's every time it has led to something that I go, oh my God, that was actually fun. Or I really loved those women. They were amazing. And so I just think that's another piece to this is whatever we go through in our lives, whatever changes we might be going through, whatever new roles we're in, you got to learn to say yes to some of those things that make you go, I don't really want to go do this, because sometimes they turn into something that you go, I'm so glad I did.
Yeah, taking those risks and being vulnerable and pushing yourself, it's how we grow and it's how we get new opportunities in front of us. And sometimes those opportunities are to meet new people. And I love that story. It makes me so hopeful. It makes me say, okay, the next time somebody says you want to meet this person, I have to actually drive into the city to go do that. Like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it because I could use more adult friends. And maybe that's the way to make it happen.
Yeah, you kind of just have to say, I'm going to do it. And here's another thing I started doing, and this is really not me. These are people that I've known from my past that have talked to me on LinkedIn or commented on a post that I've made on LinkedIn something. Normally I would have just been thank you on the post. But now I reach out, private message. There was a lady that I'd worked with years ago. I hadn't heard from in a long time, but I loved her when we worked together. I just reached out to her private message. I said, hey, I'd love to chat with you again. What are you up to? Let's jump on a Zoom call. I would have never done that in my past because, well, one, I was so swamped, busy that makes it hard to do that. But also, I just wouldn't have done it. And now I do. And she was like, absolutely. So we've got a call scheduled. And I don't know, it's kind of been an interesting growth thing for me to say, look, Pam, don't ever get too big for your britches and don't think that you're so important that You don't need those connections and those people in your life. And all the good people that I've known over the course of not just my career, but my life, I want to stay connected to the good ones. And I think that it's on me to make sure that I'm doing my part, right? There might be people that today that you go, those were just good people. I enjoyed working with them, but I haven't talked to them in 5 years since I left the company. You'd be amazed at the response you get from people when you actually reach out and go, hey, I'd love to just connect again. How are you doing? I just connected with an old college friend. She's amazing. She's like the executive vice president now of a big company. And we were just talking, and she's a mom and single. And so we had all this in common, and I just love her. And I'm like, why did I lose that connection all these years? It's because I didn't make a conscious effort. And so it was on me. I have to make a conscious effort to stay connected to the people that are good and I want to stay friends with.
And it's so important. I think we forget when we get in the day-to-day grind of parenting and working, how important it is to be connected to others and how much value it brings to be able to help and serve others. And also just to like have that energy exchange, right? That kind of like chat with someone who's on the same level, like at the same vibe as you.
And something else you'd asked me about earlier, and I want to share this with your listeners, is when you were talking about how do you balance between your children and your work. And I did my best, and I wasn't perfect at it by any means. But one of the things I'd say, if you're a working mom out there and you have a pretty busy and demanding career, some of the things that I just focused on was more the quality of the time I spent with my kids. I think it's really hard when you're trying to be there for your kids, but you're on the phone, you're taking an email, you're running off into a room to hurry up and do some little work on a project. And meanwhile, your kids are pulling at you. And I've tried to do it that way. And I found myself feeling frustrated with my kids and frustrated with myself because I was giving half to everything. And I didn't like that feeling. And I wanted to be able to give 100% at my job, and I wanted to give 100% to my kids. Well, that's not necessarily realistic. But what was realistic was to say, when I am home and I am off work, I am going to give 100% to my children. When I am at work, I'm going to give 100% for work. Now, if something comes up and I need to stop work for a second and help my kids, then I'm going to do that too. But wherever I am, I'm going to be 100% present for them, wherever that is, at work or at home. And I really found that by doing that, I made myself happier, and I also made my kids happier. Like on the weekends, it was me and my kids. But there was a reason I remained single after my divorce. I remained single for 12 years. I did not remarry because I was like, how am I going to juggle that too and deal with all of that stuff? So I guess I dated occasionally, but it was always when the kids were with their dad, or I just tried to be like, look, this is me and you kids. And then at work, it was like, okay, this is me and my team, or me and my boss. And I found that doing that really helped me feel like I was doing a decent job at all of it because I wasn't trying to do everything at once. That made me crazy.
Yeah, I think that is so powerful. This idea of being present, being in the moment, being conscious of if I'm here for this task or here for this person, I'm going to be here for this task or be here for this person and shut everything else out, sans emergencies.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't mean that I'm like, okay, kids, don't call me at work. That wasn't the case. They could call me at work. It just meant that I was going to look at my team and go, hey guys, I've got a phone call from my kids. I'm going to step out of the room. Y'all keep going. And you have to make that kind of stuff okay at work, right? You shouldn't be like, oh my gosh, can you believe she took a phone call from her kids? Absolutely, I can believe she took a phone call from her kids. She should be taking a phone call from her kids if they need her. And so I just think that you just excuse yourself for a minute, let them keep going, and you pop back in. You don't stay on the phone for 30 minutes, but you take care of your people that matter to you the most. And I think if you follow that rule, you will, at the end of your life, be pretty happy with what you did.
I love that.
And I love that now my kids are much older. I am now remarried. I don't have to juggle the babies and all of that like I did back when I was younger. But I think because of the relationship I was able to maintain and cultivate with my kids, we are super close to this day. Like we talk every day. I see my daughter all the time. She's now a mom, and I get to see her sweet little baby Harley all the time, my little grandbaby. And I love that. And so I think that's another thing as women, we have to keep our eye on the prize, right? Figure out what your prize is. Is your prize a big title at every expense from a relationship standpoint with your family, then you're going to have to sacrifice your family, right? Or is your prize, I will be successful, but not at the expense of my family. And I want one day to have a relationship with my children that lasts a lifetime, because my career will not. I'm living proof of that. Right? I was in a career for 20 years I absolutely loved, but I walked away at 20 years. And had I not built a relationship, I could be sitting pretty lonely right now. But as it is, I was able to start a new entrepreneurial path and still have a great relationship with my kids. And I have a wonderful husband who came along just at the right time, right? I was ready to remarry. My kids were out of the house. And it was like God worked it all out for me. I think we just have to keep that kind of, again, what do you want your life to look like when your career is over? What do you want your life to look like? And then manage to that, because our careers will end at some point.
Yeah, very true words. So on that note, before we go, how would you define success in your life? And has that changed over time?
Yeah, I think I probably just talked about that a little bit, but I think for me, success is about not necessarily finding balance, because I don't think that's realistic. I think harmony in your life is more achievable. And for me, harmony was about making sure my children were happy, healthy, high productive kids in their own right, and raising them to be that way. And also having a career that I was proud of. Having a career that I felt like I maintained my values and who I was in the way that I led. And so it was never for me about title. The titles came, but it wasn't about that. It was that I wanted to make a difference in the world that I was having influence over. And I wanted to do it in a way that was aligned to who I was as a person. I wanted to be able to lay my head down at night and say, I did the right thing. And I think that was for me what I was after. I did the right thing for work, and I did the right thing for my kids and my family. And if I can get to the end of my life with that, I'm in good shape.
That's amazing. Pam, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. I love this conversation, Whitney. So let's stay in touch and be friends.
Same. Yes. Let's do that. Let's do that. That's all we've got for this episode of the Savvy Working Mom podcast. One thing that would really help both us and other potential listeners is for you to rate this show and leave a comment on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen in. Also, make sure to link up with us at thesavvyworkingmom.com and on Instagram at thesavvyworkingmom. And please just share this podcast with any other mama who you think might enjoy or benefit from it. Until next time, remember, with intentional and daily action, you can live your best days now and forever.